In 2000, California's Great America opened Stealth, the world's first flying coaster. This Vekoma flying Dutchman simulated the feeling of flight with full force. Unfortunately, Stealth was notorious for constantly being closed, so much so that just a few years later, Stealth was relocated to Carowinds under the name Nighthawk. While Nighthawk performed much better at Carowinds, the ride still suffered from extended downtime and low ridership. Eventually, Nighthawk became scrap metal at the end of the 2024 season. Why was Nighthawk constantly closed? This is why Nighthawk was the most unreliable flying coaster. Since the beginning of time, humans have always been fascinated with flight. Obviously, this is because we humans can't fly for shit. Like, come on, why are the animals getting the DLCs when we aren't? But being the idiots we are, we found new ways to emulate flying. Now, granted, that had a lot of trial and error, with lots of test pilots acting suicidal as crap. But after multiple failures ending in disaster, we found new ways to fly above the air. The same thing applies to roller coasters. In the 80s, manufacturers started putting riders under the track. With models such as the Aero Suspended and later the B&M Invert, these types of coasters simulated flying a fighter jet. But they didn't offer a true flying sensation. That was until the 1990s, when a few low-budget attempts were made in, what the hell is this? This looks cheaply made and probably rides like a crackhead on black tar driving. These were single cars where one person lies in essentially a standing dog cage and traverse a slow course over the pathway. While they were revolutionary, they weren't exactly good. The first one was Skytrek at England's Granada Studios. This was the one and only Skytrek flying coaster. This coaster had one-person cars, and that one person lies down in this contraption that looks like something you'd find in your uncle's basement if it was a saw trap. The course has you slowly traverse throughout the park. While it's the first, Skytrek, to be frank, did not look like a great coaster. For one, being a single person car with terrible loading, this thing had terrible capacity, but it was also unreliable, with its operation being sporadic, and it only lasted 1 year before closing in 1998. The next attempt was Comet at some random mall in Dubai. Built by Select Contracts, this was more or less the same as Skytrek, except with even more claustrophobic single cars. What the f*** is this? This looks like a barrel you trap your kids in your basement in. This only lasted until 2005 before closing forever. We didn't see an actual quality flying coaster until the year 2000. In 1994, Vekoma debuted its own inverted coaster with El Condor at the Netherlands Walibi Holland. This is the prototype Vekoma SLC. I've mentioned before the flying coaster, the closest parks did was placing the trains under the track. Vekoma did that with El Condor, where riders traverse 5 intense inversions under the track. Unfortunately, El Condor sucks ass as the horrific track bashes riders into the hard over-the-shoulder restraints. Despite the fact that El Condor sucks, somehow Vekoma sold 42 of the original SLCs. Jeez, those parks were idiots. I think what happened here was that the inverts at the time were trending, and parks that got one were either too broke or too landlocked to get a B&M. Just in 1995 alone, 7 SLCs opened. One of them is Flight Deck at Paramount's Canada's Wonderland. Originally themed to Top Gun, Flight Deck was built under different circumstances, mainly because this was supposed to be a B&M invert, but for legal reasons, they had to go with a Vekoma SLC, and this thing royally sucked. I called this the worst roller coaster I've ever ridden. The way the coaster violently shakes you into the restraints, you would think you're getting jumped by the gangsters of O-Block. Luckily, this was the only SLC Paramount added when they operated the Paramount parks. But the thing with Paramount is that they had a weird obsession with inverted coasters, because beforehand, they added a B&M invert to Paramount's Great America and Paramount's Carowinds in 1993 and 1999 respectively. They also added an aerodynamic suspended coaster in 1993 as well. But another obsession they had was wacky, one-of-a-kind prototypes. Here's what I mean. In 1998, Paramount brought Vekoma back for 2 rare Invertigo models, Face Off at Paramount's Kings Island, and more importantly, Invertigo at Paramount's Great America. These were variants of the Vekoma Boomerang, but you instead hang under the track. And surprisingly, honestly, they were not that far bad, and they were still forceful. Granted, Hangover at Liseberg opened before this, but it was still a unique attraction. And like Hangover, it was also extremely problematic as these Invertigos were constantly down all the time. That same year, King's Dominion got Volcano the Blast Coaster, the prototype intimate inverted launch coaster. This coaster would launch you out of a volcano and traverse a series of turns and heartline rolls, but it was also unreliable as crap. See what I mean? Inverted coasters and unreliable prototypes. The same would be true for another Great America prototype that hangs under the track, this time in a different seating configuration. Back at Paramount's Great America, in 1999 they announced Stealth, the world's first true flying coaster for 2000. Unlike Skytrack and Comet, which look like suspended monorails with torture chamber cars, Stealth is an actual thrill coaster with intense elements and inversions. Stealth was built during the peak of the coaster wars. This was the period when parks were building bigger, faster, and more innovative coasters, and Paramount and Vekoma needed another big splash in the war. Keep in mind, the same year Stealth opened, Kings Island constructed Son of Beast, another problematic record breaker. How the Flying Dutchman works is that the riders board clunky seats in the sit-down position. Once you secure both your lap bar and vest, yes, this has both, I'll explain later why it needs both, when the ride is clear for dispatch, the train will move into the flying position that has the riders laying on their backs in the heads down, cheeks up position. Heyo, pause, this isn't Epstein's Island. The reason the riders are placed on their backs when they dispatch is because the track is on the floor instead of the roof. So the station, as well as the chain lift and brake run, is technically an inversion. The ride begins with a left-hand turn into the chain lift, and this chain lift still has riders on their backs facing up. So now, your eyes are getting burned by the sun and your ears are getting by the noisy chain. Once at the top, you dip down a small pre-drop into the lie to fly. This will flip you into the flying position where you're lying on your stomach. You descend down the shallow curving drop into a forceful overbank turn. You then perform a fly to lie while turning 180 degrees to the right, putting you back on your back. Next up is the vertical loop. This loop is designed like ones for a sit-down looper, but with the flying trains, the forces are applied much differently. Here, the forces will push your head back into the seat rest. Next is another lie to fly while turning to the left back into the flying position, but you quickly perform another fly to lie while turning 180 degrees to the right into the finale, a double corkscrew. Like the vertical loop, the corkscrews were designed like it's for a sit-down looper, but the flying position redirects the forces. The corkscrews make the riders feel like whack as you get thrown from the laterals. This directs you into the bricks, completing 2,766 feet, 843 meters of track. Stealth would make a big splash with a never-before-seen model of this scale. For Stealth to be installed, the log flume, Logger's Run, had to be altered and the Yankee Clipper had to be removed. Stealth opened on April 1st, 2000, and the ride, well, went kinda poorly. Not necessarily because the ride sucked. Guests liked the coaster for its novel ride position and forces. Rather, the coaster was an operational nightmare. The ride was constantly down for maintenance, resulting in periods of long closures. Even when it was open, Stealth would break down a lot for mechanical issues throughout the day. I get this is a prototype, but what happened here? First of all, there's a lot of moving parts to this. Because Stealth had to constantly move in and out of the flying position during every dispatch, there's a lot of moving parts involved in those trains. So there's multiple spots of failures where one can cause a fault. But the biggest problem was the electrical boxes that controlled the flying system. These electrical boxes monitor the restraints and locking device that allows the cars to rise and lower. The issue was that they weren't located at the electrical room where most of the electricity is. Instead, these electrical boxes were directly on the trains themselves. The reason Vekoma did this was that, rumor has it, Paramount partially funded the Flying Dutchman in order to get exclusive rights to the flyers. And I suspect this move was done to cut costs since flying coasters in general are expensive. Stealth reportedly had a price tag of $17 million. However, placing the electrical stuff on the trains caused a lot of operational challenges. Since they were on the trains, they were exposed to both the ride forces and elements. This would trigger a fault that closed the ride down and maintenance would have to reset it. This would also create tons of stress on the ride vehicles and components. These electrical issues meant Stealth was practically closed more than it was open. Paramount was so triggered by this downtime that they sold the rights to the Flying Dutchman. Rumor was that Paramount was supposed to add 2 more flyers to Kings Island and King's Dominion, but after Paramount's dissatisfaction, Six Flags claimed those 2 flyers, and as a slap to the face, installed them at the parks closest to those Kings parks. X-Flight at Six Flags Worlds of Adventure, and Batwing at Six Flags America for the 2001 season. After 3 dreadful seasons at Great America, they pulled the plug on Stealth. The reliability problems became too much to handle. So after the 2003 season, Stealth was sent out of Great America. Today, South Bay Shores, their water park, operate where Stealth sat. Honestly, I feel really bad for California's Great America. Not only have they been screwed over by Paramount, they're still getting screwed over today. They're literally set to permanently close in 2027 and be demolished after that deal in 2022. That's a sad end to a fairly decent park that I hope to visit in 2026. But that's a sad video for another day. As for Stealth, they actually sent it to another park. In 2004, Stealth was relocated to Paramount's Carowinds in the Carolinas. Now, why would they send a problematic coaster somewhere else? Supposedly, it's because Carowinds' lower attendance at the time could handle the capacity of Stealth, and Stealth here was kinda needed. Because if you've seen my Carowinds' ranking video, you know they have a lot of garbage at the bottom. It was even worse back then because the only quality attraction they had pre-2006 was Afterburn, the B&M invert. And while Stealth isn't exactly the highest rated attraction, it's still decent when compared to something like Carolina Cyclone, for example. When Stealth made the move from California to the Carolinas, it was rethemed and renamed Borg a Simulator after the Star Trek franchise. Borg a Simulator would be placed at the front of the park, replacing their paddle boat ride. Before the coaster opened at Carowinds, engineers worked out the prototype bugs and the electrical boxes were redesigned. Borg a Simulator would reopen on March 4th, 2004. While the Star Trek theming was neat, it didn't last long. After Cedar Fair bought the Paramount parks, they stripped all the licensed theming from the rides. Borg a Simulator was no exception, as they strip-searched all the Star Trek theming off and renamed it Nighthawk. Nighthawk would have a far better run in the Carolinas than in California, lasting for 2 decades. However, despite Nighthawk being better here, the coaster still suffered from operational challenges. If anything, the coaster's maintenance got worse over the years, as Nighthawk would see constant downtime and low capacity. For one, while they fixed the bugs with the trains, they still triggered faults that would close the coaster. However, 3 more obstacles became more prevalent, which hindered its run at Carowinds. The first and probably the biggest headache, part replacements. Getting parts for Nighthawk is a royal pain in the ass. With all those moving parts, it's no secret that parts have to be replaced. However, acquiring the needed replacement parts is extremely difficult and expensive. This is because Vekoma discontinued the Flying Dutchman shortly after it delivered the Six Flags installations. While they do still make flying coasters, they no longer make parts for the 3 Flying Dutchmans. This means they have to get their parts custom made, and that can get expensive and difficult real fast. The reason Vekoma doesn't make Flying Dutchman parts is because on top of poor sales from the originals, another factor was the introduction of the B&M flying coasters. Originally debuting in 2002, B&M flyers have much better reliability as they have excellent uptime and easier part replacements. As a result, 11 B&M flying coasters were sold. Because parts were hard to come by, the ride would be seen either closed for extended periods of time or running one train. That's another issue we need to address, the capacity. Vekoma Flying Dutchmans are painstakingly slow loaders. It takes the operator several minutes just to send a train, resulting in long wait times and a slow capacity of about 312 riders per hour. The reason capacity is poor is for 2 reasons. First is that the train has to be raised and lowered before and after a dispatch, which burns precious seconds. The second is that loading and checking the trains are cumbersome. Guests struggle to get in and out of the trains as they squeeze in the trains. Then the operators have to check both restraints. Why there are so many restraints is that you need a vest to prevent your upper body from dangling, but you also need shin guards to prevent your legs from dangling. That's how you get a slow-moving line, and this is an issue with most flyers. B&M flyers have a similar issue regarding capacity. The final issue is guest reception. While Stealth was praised in California, Nighthawk is a bit polarizing on whether it's a good ride or not. Keep in mind that this was built in the year 2000. Vekoma at this point weren't exactly known for smoothness. In fact, prior to their restructuring in 2008, this was probably Vekoma's best model, except it still had some rough moments. During the flying position, it's smooth as gravity helps keep your head away from the headrest. But during the lying down position, the roughness will batter your head around. You either have to keep your head down and take it like a good little boy, or fight gravity and lift your head up. But time and time again, fighting against physics physics is a losing battle, but by far the worst part of Nighthawk is the double corkscrews. In general, I find corkscrews to be hit or miss because the snappy forces will whip riders sideways. In this case, not only are the forces whipping riders side to side, but it's also rough as a bitch, so riders will feel the uncomfortable slams. This is why when the Six Flags Flying Dutchmans were built, they replaced the corkscrews with a double barrel roll and helix finale. Overall, Nighthawk would have a tough time operating with its low capacity and frequent faults. This would only get worse over the years as Carowinds became more popular following additions such as Fury 325, but in 2018, they caught a major break when Firehawk at Kings Island closed. In case you're confused, Firehawk is the former X-Flight from Worlds of Adventure. After Cedar Fair bought Worlds of Adventure and renamed it Geauga Lake, Cedar Fair sent X-Flight and renamed it Nighthawk to Kings Island around the same time Geauga Lake closed. Wait a minute, I just mentioned several minutes ago Great America was closing and Geauga Lake already closed? Ayo, someone get a background check on these parks. While Firehawk operated at Kings Island for another decade, it ultimately closed to make room for Orion, the B&M Giga. While Firehawk was scrapped, they were able to reuse parts for Nighthawk, so they shipped the parts to Carolina. This did help preserve Nighthawk for a bit, but in 2024, they were right back to square one. That year, Carowinds struggled to keep Nighthawk operational as they were running one train that entire year. Things would get even more complicated that year when Cedar Fair merged with Six Flags to become one massive mega chain. Now, this new company would be the majority Cedar Fair going under the Six Flags name. And what was their first move? The Great Six Flags Purge. This was that dreaded period when Six Flags was announcing ride closures left and right without any fanfare. This was headlined with the removal of King Decal, which still hurts to this day. But beyond Ka, they also threw away a whole junkyard of trash or problematic rides, and they announced it after they already closed for the season. Nighthawk unknowingly sent its last flight in November 2024. Later that December, Carowinds announced the removal of Nighthawk, along with the removal of the Drop Tower and Screamweaver, all of which were announced without any last rides. It is understandable why they specifically chose Nighthawk here. As I said, Carowinds has a bunch of garbage that can easily be removed, but the thing is that most of the coasters here are very reliable with little downtime. By all accounts, Nighthawk was the most problematic ride here with extreme bouts of downtime, so it makes sense to remove it. But closing it without any last rides was a major kick in the nuts disrespect to the fans. Maybe that's one of the reasons the majority of Six Flags parks this year have been empty as shit. This also meant I personally never got to ride it. I blame COVID for that. While I did make it to the park, my first visit came in 2025 after they already took it out. During the 24-25 off-season, Carowinds scrapped Nighthawk into the dumpster. Now all that's there is an empty lake. Whatever eventually replaces Nighthawk, I hope it will be a great replacement. Unfortunately, after this, I will never get to experience a Vekoma Flying Dutchman. The last one standing was Batwing, and unfortunately, that closed last July following a series of major downtime. And it's unlikely that Batwing will get relocated either, meaning the Vekoma Flying Dutchman has officially gone extinct. It is sad that this is the end of the Vekoma Flying Dutchman, as we already explained the problems with the model, and Six Flags America's maintenance is rather horrendous.
Austin, that's not the only reason they're closing Batwing.
How? That's literally the only reason to get rid of it. What other reason would they have to tear it out?
You might want to read this.
Ayo, what the f***? They're closing this park? I know Six Flags America is an absolute turd of a park, but come on, all three parks that originally got the Dutchman are either closed or closing? What is going on? Ah, I see. Cedar Fair, care to explain why you are closing these parks? Hey, bitch, get back here! Alright, looks like I have some business I need to take care of, so we'll have to save those parks for another day. Bitch, where are you going? Thank you all so much for watching this video. This video is part of my series where we dive into roller coasters and other amusement rides history and dynamics. Since you watched to the end like you have no job, please consider these tasks shown on screen. That way, this video reaches out to more people and you'll be alerted next time I upload a video. Also, I'm on TikTok and Instagram, so go give me a follow over there. On top of that, I also have my Carowinds trip report video coming out, so stay tuned for that. Finally, watch more of my bangers shown here. This is the Coaster Flood, riding out.